everybody. Today we're going to be going over pivot tables in Microsoft Excel. The data that we're going to be working with is the 2017 real property tax for Montgomery County, Maryland, and that's available at data.gov. I'll provide a link in the description so that you can follow along. Now, just briefly looking at the data, we can see that there are over 340,000 rows and over 100 columns. So clearly that's more data than any individual could look at and really be able to gather any meaningful insights from. So what we're going to do is we're going to use pivot tables, which are a very simple and powerful tool to break that data down into a much more digestible format. So all we have to do, let's start by pressing Control A. So we're going to select all the data. We're going to go up to Insert, Pivot Table. You're going to get a pop-up window. I know you can't see it. Sorry, that's because of the recording software I'm using. But all you have to do is go to the OK button, click on that, and what you're going to see is that's creating a new sheet over here in the data. So there we have it, and there are two parts to this. So we have the blank pivot table over here. It's blank obviously because we haven't plugged the data in yet. And then we have our pivot table fields over here, and you can see that each field corresponds to one of our columns in the data set. So you can see the first two are parcel code and residence. And if we come back to the data, we'll see parcel code and residence are our first two columns. Now, as just an example, let's say that we want to use this pivot table to see all of the state property tax that was paid in 2017 by each individual zip code. So we have our data here, and all we need to do is drag and drop it into these different fields. So we have filters, columns, rows, and values. So we want it broken out by zip code, so we'll drag zip code down to our rows. So we can see it creates a list of rows. Each zip code is represented only once, and then we'll drag state property tax down to the values. And so we can see over here, we have a sum of the state property tax paid for each zip code. Let's convert that to dollar format. And so, great, we have it broken out. But let's say we want to get a little more detail here, because this only tells us so much, because we don't know how many houses there are in each zip code, how many individual residences. So what we can do is we can bring property address down, and we can drag it to our rows underneath zip code. So what this is going to do, and I'll explain while it loads, is it's going to provide each zip code, and then under that, it's going to show each address that is assigned to that zip code, and it'll break out the property tax for each address. So we can see, for example, in 12040 zip code, there's only one address, and that's the same for most of these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to collapse these first few. So you can see, just one address for each. We can go down here, so say in 20705, we have a lot of addresses, and we can see the individual property tax paid by each of those addresses within that zip code. And you can see there's still quite a few there. So now what we can do, let's say we want to get even more granular here. Let's break it out by residence type. So if we look over here, we see that it looks like residences are either principal or not principal. And so we could drag that into our rows and have even more data. What we could also do is bring it over here to our columns, and so we'll have a column for each. So now we're getting into a couple of different dimensions here. So for example, we have in our 20705, right, we have the not principal residences. So we can see that how much was paid for each of the non-principal residences in the zip code. We can also see how much was paid in the principal residences. And then over here, obviously, we have the grand total. So the sum of all the values under 20705 add up to $7,014. So great, we've got a lot of detail here. Now let's actually start clearing some of this out because our data is starting to get pretty busy. So I'll go ahead and remove this field. And let's also bring it back to just zip codes. So we'll remove the addresses so that's a little easier to work with. Now we have the sum of the property tax, but let's just get a quick count of how many properties are there. So we can pull in the zip code, and then we'll do just a count. So we'll go to value field settings over here, and you can see we have different options. So sum, count, average, maximum, product. We'll do count. So we can see that the total property tax paid, for example, in 20705 was $7,014, and that was across 85 different properties. Additionally, if we want to break out our property tax payment info a little more, so we have some, let's look at the average. Okay. So we would expect, for example, that the average multiplied by the count would equal the sum. So let's just double check that. So we'll plug in a function equals this times this, and let's see what we get. Okay, so it all adds up. Now, there's plenty more that you can do with pivot tables, and I could go on for hours, but I think this has been a good introduction. And in future lessons, we'll look into pivot charts and some of the more detailed things that you can do with pivot tables, including filters and additional calculated fields. So stay tuned.